Hey guys, what's up? This is Chaos here. I'm back here with another one like always. Now, first off, I really want to start to say that it's been awesome having Luke back on doing these, even himself individually. It's nice to see he can do some of his own favorite albums. You can definitely see the difference between me and his taste in metal. He likes to do more pizza thrash type stuff, and he's probably going to be doing black metal in the future actually. I might review some black metal. It's been really hard for me necessarily to get into black metal. Other than that, I do a lot of death metal necessarily, and then some thrash. But we're back here with album review number 31, Cannibal Corpse, The Bleeding. Other than that, let's get into this necessarily with the first song called Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead. Now, these lyrics seem to be about a person who is dead but is still able to feel pain as his autopsy is necessarily being performed before him. He's watching this happen, but I think it's more from a third point of view, but he can feel it being performed on him when they open him up and slice into him. Of course, he's not bleeding necessarily, he is dead, but it's Cannibal Corpse writes a lot about the singer necessarily makes up horror stories necessarily, kind of like the singer from Cryptopsy, and it's very common in death metal music for strange horror stories like this to necessarily occur in the lyrics. Sometimes death metal is more anger driven. It sounds anger driven, but a good decent amount of the time it's not, unless if you're necessarily listening to Dying Fetus. Because to me, Dying Fetus is pure anger driven death metal, brutal death metal. Other than that, that's basically the meaning that I got out of the song Staring Through the Eyes of the Dead. Now, let's get into my number review of this song. I give it a 8 out of 10 necessarily. It's a really good song. But the intro of it is it's kind of groovy to me, and it's more something you would necessarily mosh to at a concert than necessarily headbang to. After the intro, it does get a little bit more into a headbang, feeling you could necessarily get out of it. Other than that, it's a really cool song. It's a really cool story, and it's a good starter off of a death metal album. Other than that, let's go into probably one of the most famous songs of all time, "Fucked with a Knife." This is a brutal death metal classic for Cannibal Corpse necessarily. I couldn't necessarily find the meaning of it, but it's kind of just straight up in your face and obvious. Now, I didn't read the lyrics, but it might not be about that, because sometimes a lot of the time actually death metal bands like to put up a strange title name, and then the song lyrics will be something completely different. I didn't go and delve into the lyrics though, but overall this is a very iconic song necessarily. But other than that, I give the song a 10 out of 10. It's very easy to listen to, especially if you are into brutal death metal. Cannibal Corpse is probably one of the first bands you will probably get into or necessarily hear when you're getting into more extreme metal necessarily. Other than that, 10 out of 10. Then let's get into the next one. This is also a horror story one called Stripped, Raped, and Strangled. Now, this is necessarily about a serial killer, a serial rapist who loves what he does. He knows it's wrong, and the people investigating him, they think they know his name. You can tell by listening to the lyrics. You can hear that actually. They think they know my name, and they think they know everything about me, but they don't know who I am necessarily. But it's weird because he knows it's wrong what he's doing necessarily, and he knows everything he's doing is illegal. He's conscious of that. But he has this sort of acceptance. It feels like when you're reading the lyrics, like he just doesn't care necessarily. But with all serial killers, they get this ego and they like to screw with the police necessarily, drop little hints on what's going to happen next. Usually, typically, a lot of serial killers necessarily you will find. But it's not even just that. He thinks he can always get away with it necessarily, at least the way the lyrics portray him necessarily. It's more like a first point of view from the rapist necessarily. But honestly, this is it's probably more classic than the last one. Um, Again, it's a 10 out of 10 for me. Other than that, let's go into the next song off of this album, which is the name of necessarily the album, called The Bleeding. But sometimes not every song that's the name of the album will be the first song, but it is very common. And it's also common for a few songs down, or one of the last few songs, for the title track of the album to be a far bit down in the track listing. But this has a really cool transition. This song does, it pulls off some classic death metal, brutal death metal. Now you can tell that Cannibal Corpse, their sound, vocal wise and guitar wise, a long time ago was really different than necessarily what we would consider typical brutal death metal now. Now their sound did change throughout the years, like their newer stuff, like Code of the Slashers. You can clearly tell that's basically a lot of newer brutal death metal, and people like to say, "Oh, I don't like Cannibal Corpse because of their sound necessarily," but you can argue that it's too like everybody else, but at the same time, it's very enjoyable to listen to. I like their older stuff and I like their newer stuff necessarily. It's a 50-50 for me, but I do typically tend to find to like their newer stuff more so. But sometimes I have this feeling just to listen to the older stuff necessarily. But anyways, this has a cool transition in here. The meaning that I basically got out of this is a zombie essentially waking up, and he's bleeding. He's constantly bleeding. He can't do anything about it. He's sliced all over, but he doesn't stop bleeding. That's the thing. He can't stop bleeding. It's like he's cursed necessarily. He came back to life, which everybody would think would be a gift, but he's just bleeding like constantly. So it's another kind of like necessarily a horror story, twisted horror story. But other than that, my personal number review of this song would have to be a 9 out of 10. Those are my thoughts about this song. I probably talked longer than the other songs. But other than that, let's go into the cover that they did. The next song, called The Exorcist. This is a cover that Cannibal Corpse did. The original version is by Possessed necessarily. This is actually one of Possessed's most favorite songs. Now, Cannibal Corpse inspired early death metal. They were basically the first brutal death metal band, right? So Chuck Schuldiner, who used to be alive, the singer of Death, as everybody knows, he's classic death metal. He listened to actual metal. He listened to Cannibal Corpse, and the people from from Cannibal Corpse actually listens to other metal too, just like Chuck. They did a cover of Metallica, No Remorse, and they did a cover of The Exorcist by Possessed. Now, my personal number review of this song necessarily I'd have to give it an 8 out of 10 necessarily. Now, I won't go into the meaning of this because I'm pretty sure I already did. I think I did a album review on Possessed before. If not, I will in the future. But what I like to do usually is not tell the meaning of them, because I'll probably do that album where the original song was off of in the future. So I won't have a whole lot to say about it, just how I think about it necessarily. Other than that being said, let's go into some of the extra information about this album necessarily. This is the first studio album by Cannibal Corpse, and it was released in 1994 through Metal Blades Records. This is actually not the first, but the top 5th selling record metal LP by Cannibal Corpse. In the United States, it sold over 98,000 copies. That's close. That's very close to 100,000 copies. This is also Cannibal. It is the most successful album. Hold on. Okay, it's the 5th top selling death metal. Oh, I worded this wrong. This is the 5th most top selling death metal LP in the United States, but it is also Cannibal Corpse's most successful album. But it's really good necessarily, this album. Other than that, I do like their newer music, like I mentioned before. One of my favorite songs by them personally is Code of the Slashers. That was a single at first before they released the whole album off of that. Other than that, this is an overall really heavy classic old school death metal album. But it's like classic old school brutal death metal necessarily, you could consider it. I'd have to give overall this whole album, my number review rating is a 9 out of 10. it could be a 10 out of 10, but that's necessarily hard to do with a lot of albums. You know, you can't just be like, oh, 10 out of 10, you know. Other than that, this is probably one of my favorite albums by Cannibal Corpse. But with that being said, I hope you liked the video and I hope you enjoy these. Other than that, have a good one. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what I could possibly do to do better or what you would like to see in the future. Enjoy.